All right, I'm going to go ahead and call this work session to order on AO number 2019-103 regarding on-site consumption of ballot proposition. Let's go ahead and start with introductions, starting with you, Fred.
Jason.
Austin. Davidson.
Pete Peterson. Forrest Dunbar.
Chris Constant.
Susanna France.
Felix Rivera.
Crystal Kennedy.
Cameron Perez-Medea. Dean Gates, City Council.
All right, and I think Weddleton is somewhere. So we'll go ahead and get started. Mr. Dunbar, if you want to introduce this.
Sure.
Thank you.
So this is a continuation of a conversation that started, I believe, in May, when we first started working on it. And the idea was that we would get an ordinance done in time for the tourist season. That ended up being impractical. And we ended up with, as you know, an edibles-only on-site consumption ordinance, which I don't believe anyone has even taken advantage of yet. I could be mistaken about that. After the state adopted these regulations, Fairbanks, I believe, went forward. I spoke with a Juneau Assembly member last night, and they went forward with an on-site consumption regulation. And we have the power to just do it. I mean, if we wanted to, the Assembly, under the state regulation, could just declare on-site consumption of inhalation is now legal in Anchorage. But I think during that debate, and I'm certainly there are members of the industry that want us to do that. But in our conversation over the summer, members of the public pointed out that unlike those other places, Anchorage actually has a smoking ban that was then sort of ratified or upheld by the voters by about 73% of plebiscite. And so my thinking is that for this, we should go back to the voters again if we want to do it. Now, I've already gotten a couple of panic emails about you're overturning the smoking ban, which of course is absolutely not the case with this. It won't have any impact on restaurants, won't have any impact on bars, won't have any impact on tobacco, and it won't have any impact on the places where tobacco is already consumed indoors, like the tobacco stores, or there's a couple of places they're grandfathered in, or the hookah smoking in Bernie's. This relates only to freestanding marijuana retail stores. They can create a ventilated space or an outdoor space if they can find a way to comply with the odor ordinance. In talking with some of our code enforcement officers, I think that's going to be really difficult because this doesn't impact the odor ordinances at all. So they'll have a real hard time doing an outdoor without violating the odor ordinance, but that's up to them. So Dean helped draft this, and I would ask him to maybe go through it and introduce it, if that's okay. And then we can have a conversation about it. And I believe we're going to have a community and economic development hearing on this as well on Tuesday of next week. And then it's right now scheduled for public hearing on September 10th.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Mr. Gates?
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. I think Mr. Dunbar covered what this does very well, so I don't know how much more I can add, but I've walked through the document and what it does. So the first section is just, it drags the code to place this on the ballot. Section 2 is the ballot question. And what I tried to do here is draft it to be very clear as to actually current rules that were still on. I'm sorry.
Can you speak up a little bit?
Oh, sure. So what I tried to do in drafting this is make sure that the voter who reads this question will understand that the current rules that apply, like odor not being allowed up the property line, are still applicable even if you approve this. This will allow customers to consume their one butter flour. I tried to use terms that are in code and in state regulation for on-site consumption, and also use some layman terms at the top of page 2 to describe the effect of this proposition. So, for example, that the areas have to be isolated and ventilated, either in separate rooms or site obscured outdoor area. The consumption areas can only be accessible from the retail marijuana store premises. That's current code 2. Can only have a door from the retail area to the on-site consumption area. It can't be accessible from anywhere else outside. The odor of marijuana not allowed to be detected by a person with a normal sense of smell, which is again current code. that retail marijuana stores will have smoke-free area for employees to monitor the consumption area. Part of that relates to the amendments that are in section 4 of this ordinance. So I didn't want to go through the whole question, but I think you get the idea that question is designed to show what existing rules are that would apply to smoking by inhalation, and what a little is new would be added if this proposition is approved. So section 3 would be amendments to Title 10 to the licensing scheme. And you may recall that the Assembly passed AU 2019-66, allowing on-site consumption of edibles only. But at the same time, we had a work group that drafted language that would accommodate consumption by smoking as well. If we just added, made some simple amendments to that later. That simple amendment is here on page 2, line 36, adding to 108306A2A that they could sell marijuana butter flower quantities not to exceed 1 gram, and that's quantity established by the state regulations. So we're just being consistent with them. The edibles part is in B. So this doesn't add much more to Title 1080 because we already took care of what would be required, for example. And I left some language in here for context, starting at the line 45 on page 2 about the consumption area being isolated and having access from the outside. And page 3, number 3, the inhalation, we're just looking at the ventilation system. That's current code that we inserted with the prior ordinance, 2019-66. The only addition here is a reference in number 2, line 5 on page 3, that the smoke-free area had to be consistent with, and to cross reference to language that's added by this ordinance in 1663-85, the secondhand smoke control ordinance, and another cross reference added on line 34 here. So the changes to Chapter 1080, the licensing process, are very simple. There are more substantial changes to the secondhand smoke control ordinance. So starting on section 4, but page 4. So the secondhand smoke control ordinance is structured so that it has a section about where smoking is prohibited and along this. It mostly prohibits in enclosed public spaces. That's there is, however, excuse me. So the language added here in A1 and A2 is simply to reflect what 1080 says and what the requirements are. Secondly, we have another section, the secondhand smoke control ordinance, about where smoking is not prohibited. And this is adds in paragraph A5 about marijuana consumption areas and edibles. And the language here really reflects what is in 1080 in terms of separate room on premises for the smoke-free area for employees, separate room on premises, and in compliance with 1080-720, which is video monitoring, or a separate room showing a wall that contains a transparent window, or any other way that they can design. The idea between A, little I, and B2I is, I guess, the most common sense ways you can comply with the smoke-free area for an employee. And little I3 is just to not bar any sort of innovation that a business owner might have or an engineer might have in terms of making a smoke-free area with arrow curtains or whatnot. You know, I'm a lawyer, I'm not an inventor, but we're not blocking innovation as long as the, I guess, area will be smoke-free. And code enforcement will be sure of that. And the planning department, when they get plans and review it, they will be looking at whether that is actually creating a smoke-free area. So, the ventilation requirement is there in A5B, again, which is West Reference in 1080 in Title 21. And we have this ordinance reviewed by the planning department, planner Ryan Young, who's been heavily involved in the marijuana applications. And he said we don't need any changes to Title 21 to accommodate this. So that's all. So we can start the meeting 10:80 and the second hand smoke control ordinance and bring the proposition to the voters. And then the effective date here would be after approved by the voters on April 7th, after certification of installation. So it's the only thing to add. Any questions?
Thank you. Ms. Alatel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Have we reconciled the definition of what's freestanding and what's not? Because I know that's come up a couple of times.
The definition of freestanding we had in our code already. We actually added that with the prior ordinance 2019-66. And we just cross-referenced the same definition the state uses in AS Title 18, I think it is.
Mr. Shooting.
Thank you. Through the chair, just as a follow-up, the discussion around freestanding and the definition of freestanding that's been circulating most recently is because of some action taken by AMCO on their first on-site application, which was denied by virtue of the split vote. And apparently the central issue was whether that particular business was truly defined as freestanding. I will admit I don't know the full details of that particular case to describe in detail why that was a question, but we'll get that and we can certainly provide that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Quinn Davidson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this would need to be voted on by the end of January to get on the ballot, correct?
Yeah. First meeting in January or second?
I believe first meeting
In January
right?
sometime. So I asked Ms. Pineda, the head of the health department, what she thought about this, and she said that she didn't have time to come up with a recommendation prior to September 10th. And given that we're not in a hurry, I'm wondering, this seems like something that would fall squarely within the health policy committee. I'm wondering whether you would be willing to give it a little time so that we can bring it to have the health department weigh in and also involve the committee.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my preference then would be, because it's already out in public, people have talked about it, perhaps doing, I think here, we're gonna open, there's going to be public hearing on this on September 10th, and people are going to show up and testify on it. And then at that point, if we want to do an extension to the 24th, I might be open to that, and then you could do that. But we've already announced by virtue of how it was introduced, Mr. Weldon talks about this a lot. If we sort of make a prior agreement that we're not actually going to have public hearing on the 10th, and then once people show up for public hearing, I think that's bad form. So we're going to have public hearing on the 10th, and then if we decide then we want to extend it to the 24th, I might be comfortable with that. And then,
Yeah, or even beyond that. I mean, in my view, that's why I asked about the timeline. There isn't a rush, so why wouldn't we? It's fine to take public comment. That sounds great, but then I think we should try to engage the health department and understand what the health. I mean, we've been doing this really good system, which is engaging our communities and taking. You saw it with Tobacco 21. It was much more successful after we actually took the time to analyze it. So, yeah, I'd like to see if we take the time on something this big.
Thank you. Ms. Jones, did you want to speak on timeline?
Yes.
Sorry, yeah, Ms. Jones and then Mr. Gates.
The deadline for introduction is going to be the first meeting in January. The deadline to pass will be the second meeting in January.
okay.
Thank
To
you.
get it on the
So,
April ballot.
we couldn't do it early. Yeah, so I'll just say on that, if there's a legitimate reason why the health department needs to have a certain amount of time, I'm comfortable with that. But I am not looking. I wouldn't want to push this off until January, and the reason is because after we pass it, that's actually the beginning of the real public discussion. Then it will be a ballot initiative, and I think there are a number of groups that want to have that very public discussion. And I also, if you wait until January, then you increase the chances that for one reason or another it doesn't make the ballot. I do want this to make the ballot, so I proposed it. So if we want to push it out a little ways, I might be comfortable with that, but I am not, you could certainly make a motion, but I will probably not support a motion to push it to January.
And that's not what I was suggesting. I was just asking when the deadline is so we know what's sort of the outside. And I can get in touch with Natasha and ask her, and maybe Suzanne and I can talk about if we were to schedule a special health policy committee meeting to talk about her findings or something when that could be.
Great. Mr. Gates, then Mr. Costa.
Thank you. I was going to respond to the question about freestanding. in drafting this, left the word freestanding out of the title of the proposition. But we do have the word freestanding in the language of the summary of the proposition and in the question. I think it's fair to leave in place, but like Mr. Schutte mentioned, it's sort of a loaded and confusing term. So I just wanted to point out that I didn't want it to be in the title of the proposition.
Thank you. Mr. Constant. Oh, did you?
No, I'm sorry.
So, Ms. Jones, we have an ordinance introduced to change the timeline for the introduction of matters to the ballot, I believe. And is that still the second meeting in January if all that's approved?
Either way, it's going to be the first meeting in January for introductions, second for approval. All we're doing is the proposed ordinances moves the dates 1 week earlier. We haven't set your schedule for January, so we're good.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Mr. Perez-Verdilla.
I guess I have a few questions. In terms of process, when we went through the process of discussing and debating and getting public comment on edibles, we had more than one work session on it. We had the police department come. We had lots of questions about how will this work, what will this look like, that sort of thing. I guess I'm a little confused. Is that not the process here as well, so that we can have a full understanding of what this actually would mean if it were to be approved? That's one of the questions that I have. And I have many of those questions. I have questions about what freestanding means, what the distance of that means. I've not been in a place that has had such an advanced ventilation system that you can have, a group of, and what's the capacity? 10, 20, 50, 100? What's the largest, And then do we actually have the technology to have 40 people in a room smoking and have no smell outside of that? So I guess I have lots of questions, but I'm not sure the right format for this because none of those people are here to answer those questions for me. So, but I realize, and I guess because the issue on the table is to bring this to the public and have them vote, those are the questions they're going to have. So I guess that to the degree that some of those things of trying to create a realistic expectations of if this were to pass, what would this mean? What would it look like in my community? What would it look like? How would it change what it is now? If we can try to answer some of those as quickly as possible, not to delay it, but to ensure that information, the accurate information is out there so we know what to expect, I think it would make the process better.
Thank you, Mr. Perez-Verdilla. Yeah, go ahead.
So I guess I would say two things. One, I think, work sessions are an appropriate time to gather evidence from folks that maybe have a subject matter expertise that we don't. And there are people from the industry here that could potentially speak to that. We do that today. Okay. Or I'm perfectly open to gathering questions if people have specific questions I can pass on to others. So we can try to do that again. And if Mr. Welton is open to doing that at the CED meeting, it might be a good location for that. I think that, this is a much simpler ordinance than the one we did over the summer, which had Title 21 implications, which was ended up being two ordinances, and I think some of the discussion around this is sort of duplicative of what we did. We did a lot of the hard work over the summer and got in code what a lot of the Title 21 stuff would look like. And what this is doing is saying, to a certain degree, all it's really doing is inserting this one Section 3A2A, something like that. We kind of set up the code in such a way where you could insert this in there. We had that explicit conversation over the summer and the CD meetings when we were debating this. And so, but I think what this ordinance does is instead of just insert it, it says, ask the people if they want us to insert it, and then the vote of the people sort of activates the code as if we pass it. So I think that's one of the reasons why I don't think we probably need quite as many of all the things we did over the summer. But I'm certainly open to having more than is typical, which is why we have a work session and a CED meeting and potentially another work session and then potentially a health policy committee meeting as well. But yeah.
Chair, can I
Yeah.
just respond? So, yeah, I mean, I just begin with some of those questions. One of the things we talked a lot about is the impact of an edible and the delayed reaction to that, and how the police would respond to that, and what that looks like in terms of, you know, how much time. And so I guess I have the same questions as it relates to smoking. You know, what is the process for the facility managing that, managing people who are impaired, and what do the police see as an impact of this, as it's different from the edible, because we really spend a lot of time differentiating them and saying they're very different in terms of how they impact you and the timing and that sort of thing. So I'm really interested in getting the law enforcement's view of this in terms of how will this impact their ability to respond to issues and that sort of thing. So that's one. I like their voice in this. I don't have a sense. I know that there's certainly Title 21 issues about, you know, the facility itself, but I am interested in people from the industry who have a vision for this. What does this look like? What is the if I'm going to have people there, what's the general size I'm looking for? Am I looking for a very small, intimate room of 5 to 10 people? Am I looking for a larger space with 50 to 100 people in there? And so that's another piece that I'm really interested in, and just trying to get a sense of realistically what will this look like. And I guess a third thing is trying to understand how you can sell it and have people consume it, and not have people who are working there be in contact with it at all. Is there a window that slides up and down, multiple layers, so that smoke doesn't creep in? How does that work so that if I'm an employee there, I'm not sort of exposed to smoke, or am I? So those are three. I'll have a whole bunch more. So.
Thank you. So I have a lot of people in the queue. I have Mr. Dyson, myself, Mr. Gates, Ms. Salatello, Mr. Constant, and Mr. Peterson.
No, yeah.
So, Mr. Dyson.
Yeah, as we go down the road here, I'm going to want to know what other jurisdictions' experience has been. We can always learn from other people. I think it's absolutely imperative that we hear from the health department. I have seen literature claiming to be authoritative that marijuana smoke is more detrimental to the pulmonary system than tobacco smoke. But on all of it, it's smoke. We're suffering because of forest fire smoke, and people's lungs are being damaged, and people are so on and so forth. Cigarette smoke has got some other problems because of the additives. Most pipe cigar smokers don't inhale, and they don't have the issues. But I want to know what marijuana smoke risk and detrimental is, and whether or not there ought to be signs up warning folks that potential danger. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dyson. So I have similar concerns as Mr. Perez-Padilla has regarding the process. Just going back as one of the sponsors for the edible ordinance, the reason that I moved to bifurcate this issue was that I imagined edibles would take a much shorter time than the discussion around inhalation. And I said that on the record many times, that the inhalation discussion needs to be very thoughtful, we need to make sure that we engage our community in it, and it needs to be something that's not rushed. And I appreciate what Mr. Dunbar and Mr. Constant have put together here for us today. I am curious as to why the sponsors decided to add sections 3 and 4 versus just truncating this to the first two sections. And if we look at how we did marijuana as an example, when we took it to the vote of are we going to regulate and tax this, that process, the hard work happened after the vote of, okay, how's this actually going to look now that the people have decided we want to regulate and tax this? So why we would not follow that same process when we're looking at this? Because I don't know if we can, between now and when we want to get this to the ballot, really have that type of process.
Do you want me to answer that?
Yeah.
So I think it's generally the case that we do not ask purely advisory questions. I remember back when, who was on the assembly at that point? Might have just been John and Pete. Amy wanted to do a ballot prop that was, should we remove fluoride from the water, right? And I think that's generally not good form. I think also you catch yourself in a little bit of a bind here, because it's like, if you don't show what actual laws will be changed, then the public says, you're not telling us what actual laws will be changed. How can we vote for this if you're not showing us what laws will be changed? You know what I mean? And so what this does is it shows which laws will be changed. And there'll probably be some other additional cleanup to be done too, but it shows the main changes to the law, and it says that those don't go into effect unless the ballot initiative passes. And I think we've done things like that before. Mr. Gates can speak to it. But I think that is a more standard practice than a purely advisory vote.
Yes, I agree. Advisory votes are usually not recommended. They take a lot of resources and time, and then you still have to do the work afterwards when you have the results. I was in the queue to speak next, if I may.
I just want to thank you for that, Mr. Dunbar.
Well, can I ask him also, Dean? Are there any other examples you can use where we did something similar to this, where we ask a ballot proposition, but it includes other changes to the code?
I know I've seen some before. I can't remember specific examples. I've seen this done this way. We'll have one ordinance, the ballot question, and then code amendments. I've also seen this done, like Mr. Rivera mentioned. I think that was the marijuana retail sales tax and some other questions in Austin. If I recall correctly, we had approved the questions go to the ballot for the marijuana retail sales tax. And then in the interim for the April election, the Treasury Division, and I was working with the Department of Law at the time, put together the ordinance to amend the code. So we had it ready by the time the election results were in for the code amendments. It was just a separate ordinance that did the two actions. So, there's maybe a dozen different ways we could actually do this. And actually, I think that this way was kind of suitable for this question on the ballot, because the code amendments are very simple and straightforward in my opinion. The tough thing is the policy question. Should we allow consumption by smoking or not? And I'm kind of going to segue into what I plan to say, if you don't mind.
Actually, I just wanted to finish my comments really quick. I appreciate that sort of the technical code provisions are relatively easy, at least on face value. But I consider the comments that I made on the record regarding this, that we would not rush this process, and that we would take our time when we did inhalation, to be a promise to the people that we would take our time. And I just don't feel, unless we postpone this substantially, that we can adequately have that conversation. But I'm willing to keep listening to what other folks have to say on this. Mr. Gates.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. So I hear several concerns that people have and want more information about what this would do. And I just want to emphasize, passing this ordinance doesn't change the law at all. Punch that to the voters, and you have a lot of time between April when the election occurs and we pass this in September or January to I guess, actually looking like I expect, and I can't guarantee it, but I really expect there to be campaigns on this ballot question. Yes, a yes campaign and a no campaign. We'll have the education, information, and data, and articles discussed or pushed and out there, campaign materials by both sides. I also think that, and facilities probably done this before, hosting a town hall with panel of experts and so forth. You could do that if you wanted to, you don't have to, but there's a lot of opportunity to get the questions you want answered, and questions and all that information is valuable to people who make the decision on whether this should become law or not. That's the voters. This ordinance puts that question to the voters. So I just wanted to mention that, because you don't have to feel the burden of making a decision, yes or no, and not having sufficient information. You know, this burden is only, should we put this question to voters or decide it yourselves? If you want to decide it yourselves and you want more information, then maybe you wouldn't decide it on it. But if you want the voters to decide, you've got a lot of opportunity to get information out there to yourselves and to voters.
Thank you. Ms. Salatel.
Thank you. Maybe for the CEDC meeting, it would be helpful to get a map of where the current licensed freestanding locations are around town. I know Mr. Yell has usually a map that kind of shows us where, so we kind of just know, and maybe then to those who don't go to that meeting, we can pass it out to all the members. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Constant.
Thank you. There's one question I know we can answer that Mr. Presberty had, and that's on the capacity. Are we going to see 100 people, 200 people? And we're not. This is attached to a licensed facility, and the licensed facilities that are freestanding are limited. The properties are few, and it will only be based on the capacity that the space that is dedicated to this use can hold. And so there isn't any facility that's even really imaginable that would have room for 200 plus people. This room's capacity is, I think, 90 or 70, and that's standing only. And so there are constraints within our code that currently will restrict any expansion to any grand scale, even though we don't ask that question of bars. We don't ask that question of other places where people go to become intoxicated. And in fact, you can get a permit to use a hall for 1,000 people that serves alcohol. Under this practical use, you won't. And so there at least is some structure around that. And I am supportive of asking the voters the question. I'm also supportive of having as much of the process as people need to get this question resolved for themselves. We will see a parade of horribles, and then we will see it again, because that's just how it's going to be. All of the worst stories are going to come out, and because we see it every time this conversation comes up. And I would just stand on behalf of the industry to say that so far so good. The horribles haven't shown up.
What are those?
The parade of horribles. It's kind of the Supreme Court.
Horribles?
Horribles. All the bad things in the world that could possibly happen.
Yeah.
No W.
Yeah. You know, oh yeah.
Did you have a follow-up to that, Mr. President?
Oh, well, I guess it's part of the conversation because I'm less familiar than you are with it. But like the edibles, you would need a separate room from where you sell it.
Yep.
So either you have that space available now, you limit your selling space and create or what that sort of thing. But the question, I guess, what I have is what's the ratio of? Is there code specifically for this kind of use? Is it exactly the same as the edible in that it's, if I have a 12 by 12 room, there's a capacity there. That's the capacity based on Title 21. But does this change that at all because of the activity that's happening within that room? It's different than a retail space. It's a consumption space. That's what I'm wondering.
And if I might, I don't think it's Title 21 though. I think it's the building code that would restrict how many people can safely be inside of a space. And so we're not touching any of that. Those requirements
doesn't change based on what's happening in that space.
The only thing we changed is the amount of parking required. We reduced the number of parking spaces required for this use to the same amount that are required for the retail. And so that's the only change that we've fiddled around with. I don't think the fire marshal would allow us to mess around with the number of people allowed in a space safely. Doesn't matter the use.
But wouldn't you imagine that people would want to create larger spaces after this passes?
The practical reality is where and how. These buildings are limited, the locations are limited, the properties are expensive, and it just isn't. It's not realistic.
Can we ask Chris? Do you remember, or Dean, do you remember in the original on-site consumption ordinance? Because you have to get a endorsement to do this. Were there rules about the percent of the retail space that could be dedicated to this, or the square footage? Do you remember?
Through the chair, I'll jump back into it, but I don't believe there was. And Manny's just confirming with me right now, so No, there wasn't.
Sorry.
But what the original regulation changes at the state level included to allow on-site marijuana consumption went beyond just the Title 21 changes that you approved. There were a number of other Title 20 or zoning-based changes that those state regs approved. We pulled those out of the original on-site ordinance. They're moving on a separate track through the traditional Title 21 code amendment process, meaning planning and zoning, and you'll see them later this fall. But they're, in my opinion, relatively de minimis about freestanding signs and things of that matter. It has nothing to do with substantial space, size, etc. To the original point about cramming a bunch of bodies in a room, fire code does dictate that. Fire code does look at the use, and different uses have different limitations. So I don't think we're going to find ourselves in a situation where an operator is trying to put 50 people in a room that's really only cleared for 25 people.
Right. Now, your lighting things. This is, I mean, I think it's a little bit of a different use. So that's why I was wondering if there's a different regulation around what can be done with that space.
Thank you. So I have Mr. Peterson, Ms. LaFrance, and then Ms. Altel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And the fire department is doing regular inspections on these businesses, and they could just provide a maximum occupancy when they're doing those inspections. Also, I'm thinking about the Marijuana Control Board. After the first season in other jurisdictions where they had on-site consumption, they may get reports back and make changes to state code. So we're going to have to keep an eye on that, because it may be a moving target, so to speak. And that's all I got.
Thank you. Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, just to confirm, Mr. Yates, we would need a supermajority to put this on the ballot, correct? 8 votes?
It's
No?
not a charter amendment.
Oh, it's not. No, oh, that's right, that's only for a charter amendment.
Majority,
Okay.
it's to change the charter. It's
Okay.
just to amend the charter.
Okay, so 6 or whatever is the majority of, okay, thank you. And then my 2 concerns are primarily the same ones I had in the last discussion, the public safety piece concerning impaired driving, and then the health impacts, and in this case, definitely pertaining to the ability of and feasibility of providing a smoke-free area to employees. Those are my 2 big concerns.
Thank you. Ms. Altel.
Yes, another question to possibly be addressed through the CEDC is, can a retail establishment be created only for consumption? We had that conversation kind of briefly, because there has to be different sale, point of sale. I think we talked about our different packaging or something, I don't know, for the purposes of consumption. And it can only be through a retail establishment. Do they need to sell both types of marijuana? Isn't the right way to say that, but both sets of marijuana for to go and for on-site? Is that going to be a requirement? Is it a requirement? And it can be discussed more fully if we need time for it at the committee meeting.
Okay, looks like we need time. So
Okay.
On Tuesday, Mr. Weddleton.
Just to address that though, the way the state's done it, anything you smoke, you have to abide at that retail store.
I understand,
So-
but can you only go there to buy to smoke there, or can you just buy to take home? Can someone do just the one without the other?
Speaking as a retailer, make every sale you can. Anyway,
Andy is-
I have a question for Dean. The way this is worded, this is page 2, line 7, say 6 and 7, regarding odor. Normal sense of smell at any lot line where marijuana consumption areas are located per current code. So if we change the code after this is voted on, does this lock us into a certain version of code regarding odor?
I would say no, but that's a very good question. This says per current code. It should still be current on April 7th. It says the same thing. I mean, you as the assembly, you're the only ones that can change the code, so if this passes and we have an ordinance before you, that changes that specific provision about normal sense of smell without line and odor detection, I would be advising you don't do that. You have an election about that. So, but after this passes, you could change the code related to odor at the lot line. There is rule in charter that when an initiative passes, that you can't change that law passed by initiative for 2 years. But this is not an initiative. That rule is specific to initiatives started by the citizens, direct legislation. This is the assembly giving this legal question to the voters. So it's not the same thing. I don't think that 2-year restriction on changing code would apply.
Some instances I'm thinking we've talked about, well, using normal sense of smell is fairly subjective. Maybe there will become a device we'll use that will test the air. So if we switch from normal sense of smell to using that device, that could change the whole result. And another thing we're looking at is, we say at the lot line, and this might not apply here because I guess it's not freestanding, but we were talking about if you're in a strip mall, you can't let this odor of marijuana be in the unit next to you. So those are changes we've talked about that are within the realm of possibility. If that happened, would we say, well, this passed, it was just by sense of smell, not by nose ranger. So we have to stick with the sense of smell.
Oh, well, again, if you make that sort of code change, I would advise postponing that ordinance to change code until after the election. And after the election, if this passes and you change code, then that's your prerogative to do so as the lawmaking body here. I don't think that would affect the election, so that's my off-the-cuff answer.
Thank you.
Ms. Honest?
So I was going to address Mike's question. When I thought about what you said, your question was, could they just apply for an on-site consumption endorsement?
No, I understand they have to be a retail establishment with an endorsement, but can they choose just to sell for purposes of on-site consumption?
They could. It would still be the same process, but as Mr. Walton said, it would kind of be silly, I think, to pay that much for the retail license and not utilize that portion of it and just limit it to on-site only. But they could.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Constant?
I think I've said that. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
We have for members of the public to speak.
Yeah, I was just going through.
Just
Yeah.
ask a question related to Meg's question. We asked this before, and I think Mr. Shuby answered it, but I purchase a certain quantity, but I only can consume a certain quantity. So do we need to package, is there a requirement to package them separately so that you can only purchase the amount that you're able to consume in the facility? And that's where I'm trying to get a sense of am I walking in, am I purchasing it, and then I'm going into the consumption area to consume it, but I can only bring in, if I can't buy more than I'm able to consume while I'm in there. So I'm interested in how one manages all of that, from the packaging to the point of sale, and whether you have to have 2 points of sale, and how that fits within the regulation.
I think Mandy and I can tag team this one. I'm probably going to hopefully have the same answer. So I'm going to try and break your question up into pieces. Separate POS, I believe the answer is no. You don't need it. It does not require a separate POS, at least not in the code as written or in the state regulations. To your other question about quantities and labeling, the on-site endorsement does require specific labeling for product that is supposed to be consumed on-site. However, don't forget that the code and the state regulations also allow the purchaser of that product to remove that product from the store if they don't consume it all there. It has to be properly repackaged, etc. But yes, but so if you go in to buy your, I'm going to get these numbers wrong because I don't go, but your 3 milligrams of cookies and you only eat 1 milligram, the retail establishment will be able to repackage the remaining 2 milligrams for you to remove from the premises.
And did you want to speak on that, Mr. Dunbar?
No, I was actually going to ask Mandy to comment on it. And then also, I think, we do have a little bit of time, and a lot of these questions, I think there are folks in the audience who are contemplating actually setting up these facilities. And work sessions are for information gathering. I think it'd be a good time to hear from some of them.
I agree.
Yeah,
I just
absolutely.
have one last note.
Yeah.
Just FYI, if you didn't get the notice today, the governor did appoint a 5th member to the board, and it is the previous member, Bruce Schulte, which should make things move more efficiently at this time.
Thank you. Mr. Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I just want to remind members that if you go into a restaurant and buy a bottle of wine, you're not required to finish that wine before you leave. They can put the cork back in and you can take it home with you, and so this would be a similar situation. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, seeing no further questions, let's go ahead and go to members of the audience that want to speak on this. Yes.
Hi.
And if everyone could just state their name for the record when you begin.
My name is Carla McConnell, and I just have a couple of questions. First of all, I do agree with some of the members that I think that the on-site consumption edibles was rushed before we really thought it out, and I think that it would be a big mistake to rush this one again without thoroughly thinking out. But my question is, how did you determine how much on-site consumption for inhalation? I'm assuming this is the 1 gram. I mean, did you have expert accounts on that 1 gram was allowable for them to get in their car and leave and not be impaired? And how did we come up with the amount?
It was, it's that 1 gram is from state law. And of course, this does not in any way impact DUI ordinances. If you smoke a gram of marijuana and you are impaired and you try to drive home, you'll be breaking the law criminally and can go to jail.
And is there any amount of marijuana that they can consume on site that they can get in their car and drive home?
I don't know. Probably not. I mean, I guess folks do have 1 beer or 1 glass of wine, and some folks drive. It's not advisable. We do have, we had a presentation during the edibles conversation about intoxication and more and the presence of the drug. And the way it works is the police have to have probable cause to pull you over. If they have probable cause to pull you over, and then they discover that you have marijuana in your bloodstream or THC in your bloodstream, then that right there is evidence that you have broken the law. Although I don't recall, if anyone can recall, if they did have a threshold level of existence, because I don't think they
don't. It's whether you're impaired.
No, but
when they do the blood test, Mr. Chair, what they have told us at this committee meeting is that there are 2 substances they test for.
Right.
One that demonstrates current intoxication and one that demonstrates the presence of the cannabinoids over time. And so the science is certainly evolving, but they stated before us that they can pretty good certainty make a determination if a person was actively intoxicated beyond a certain point.
because they do the field sobriety test.
That's the first part,
Right.
and they're experts at that. They can determine it if you are impaired. But impairment can come from being tired. It can come from any number of variables, and so they have other testing that they do.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes.
Hi, I'm Jeff Hickman with the Health Department. And through the chair, just speaking on the earlier issue about the Health Department getting ready, we're going to do our best to be prepared for that first meeting we have. We're meeting internally Monday to start the discussion and prepare the policy statement.
So when were you thinking, like what date?
I have the deadline in our internal meeting is like the end of the month for coming up with the position, with the statement, the research.
Okay.
Good.
So we're going to work as quickly as we can and dedicate our time to get that done quickly.
I can't remember, did you take a position on the edibles?
We did not take an official position there.
Is there a reason why you didn't take it there and you take it now?
We wrote up a policy statement, but nobody ever asked us for it. So we do have one. We do have one, but for the edible stuff, we had brought it with us to the meetings. We can provide a copy of the one we wrote up earlier to the body.
So just logistically for the folks that are scheduling the health policy committee meeting, it happens to be the case that the two sponsors of this ordinance will be out of the state in the first week of September, so I would just ask to not do it in the first week of September.
Yeah.
On that point, Mr. Chairman?
Yeah.
It would be my opinion that policy things coming from the health department are so important to citizens and so on, that we get a copy. Yeah. So you can filter the stuff that policymakers need to know, that you know. We need it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, thank you.
And I have one more
Sure.
thing about the code stuff, because we just got it like 2 days ago. But I'd like to see an addition in there that would, because our point is to prevent the employees' health, and there's nothing in there that prevents them from entering the smoking area to service it while there's smokers in there. So I'd like it would be nice if we would be able to add a line in there that would say that employees are prohibited from entering the consumption area while people were in there smoking. So just an additional step to protect employees.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, hi, Kerry Carey, I'm the Executive Director of the Marijuana Association of the state. I think that part of what needs to happen here, in addition to, I'm enjoying the discussion, but I would like to ask if the Assembly be interested in meeting with a group of industry people and some medical professionals who have knowledge of the effects and dosages and how consumption is exposure to smoke, marijuana smoke, and these types of things, and maybe to be able to share that information, because research is really hard to come by. I appreciated some of the Dyson's comment earlier, and there was just recently, he may have been referencing this, the Harvard medical study that just came out in less than 30 days ago, but even they state in that paper that the lack of research that's able to be done by anyone because of the Schedule I status of resin cannabis makes it very difficult to make determinations of things. However, they say they know there are certain specific physical conditions which happen when you smoke marijuana, and so people who have a propensity to have heart attacks or heart incidents should not smoke. And so I understand that, but still, even they say that this research is not exhaustive. It's not to the point where it should be. And I think there are still a lot of misconceptions and a lot of things which are being discussed about how, you should never be exposed to marijuana smoke. And they were talking about the firemen who, couldn't go into the room. But, a burning mattress is, I'm sure, far worse than, somebody who's got a butt of a pre-roll sitting in an ashtray in a room. So I'm just trying to say that there's more information that's available, and I think that it would be helpful to discuss that. And if the Assembly wants to, I'm sure I can put together a group of people from this room who can answer any questions you have. So I just want to point that out.
Thank you. Mr. Dunbar.
So I would suggest, if we do have a health policy meeting, I think that would be an appropriate forum for it. The CED is usually focused on issues dealing with Title 21 and that kind of thing, and we have that meeting on Tuesday. Probably not a good setting for that kind of presentation. But if we had, at the health policy meeting, basically two main presentations, one from the health department and then one from the industry, if they had any additional health-related information, I think that would be a good forum for it. Of course, I don't control the agenda for the health policy committee, so it's just your request.
Mr. Chair. On that point, I would ask the health committee, after they've heard all they think they need to from the health department and others, take an action. We endorse, what the Department of Health has said.
Thank you. Mr. Constant.
And to address concerns we've also heard, it might be wise then to schedule it with the Public Safety Committee just for a conversation with the police again, so that there's no ground that a complainer could make that we didn't hear the public safety concerns as well in this effort to go forward.
Thank you. Yeah.
I just want to make a note for the record. I'm at the very least surprised and partly appalled that there was a report that was available that was not shared because it wasn't requested. And so I guess I would just say on the record to the administration, whoever, I don't know if that's policy that we have to request something in order to receive it, but it seems very odd to me. Is that so? I mean, if there is information available from the administration pertaining to an issue that we are debating, I would strongly suggest that the administration provide that information to us because it would be helpful.
Mr. Chair. I just read this policy, mayor's directive handed to us today on written communications information must be initiated by an assembly member. If you didn't ask for it, they're directed not to give it to you.
Mr. Sheedy.
Through the chair, thank you. As Mr. Hickman indicated, the health department brought forward a quote-unquote policy, but I think it's important to note that when we were discussing on-site edible consumption, they didn't have a recommendation for or against it. So I don't want anyone to think that we withheld some kind of evidence that said the health department opposes this ordinance. But to your point about being more forthcoming with information, thank you for that. We'll make sure that happens.
Thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
And as one of the co-chairs of the Health Policy Committee, I'm going through my emails because I thought that came out, and I thought if it did, it was distributed. But then I might be getting confused with the Tobacco 21.
I
know we
only
have.
remember getting one from Tobacco 21, which is why we slowed the process down. So I don't remember edibles. But you might just have a better memory.
Thank you. All right. Would anyone else like to speak? Yes.
Hi, thank you, Chair and members of the Assembly. Kathy Gleason, President of Turnigan Community Council. We've submitted comments on these issues before, and we were against the ordinance allowing on-site edible. We had previously taken a position that we're against on-site inhalation when you guys considered it a few years ago and then backed off because you had the state step in and have their rights. I guess when I read this ordinance, I'm still quite perplexed, and some of you touched on it, as how you actually determine a normal sense of smell. And facetiously, my note says, will there be regulated, and how will this be regulated and enforced? Will APD or code enforcement have to have people licensed in some way or trained in some way so that they have a normal sense of smell before they go on site to determine if any code violation is taking place? I mean, that's how ridiculous this is. It's very subjective. And I just don't know how you're going to get around that, because I don't think there's any device that can be completely objective and say, there's odor, and then, or some kind of needle that moves. And exposure to the odor next to any kind of outdoor area or any kind of outside ventilation from outside is critical in terms of impact to the community in general. So I think that still needs to be vetted out to a lot greater degree. It sounds, I mean, it just says, hey, as long as we don't see the smoke, but I guess it's not there, is not enough. It's just not enough. And I think since all of us have been exposed to so much wildfire smoke this summer, it does impact health. It does impact people. When things are burned, you've got toxic things in the air, and people are being exposed to it. And so I think the Assembly has to have the ability to look out for the general public's health before they want to accommodate an industry that is still evolving and certainly has a legitimate place within our community, but only to the extent that it doesn't cause public community harm. So thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Russ Reno from the Downtown Community Council. I also am on the Marijuana and Alcohol Committee that advises the council on our official positions. We don't have an official position on whether or not we support this ordinance. We've left that open to the people. We do believe in the vote being counted and that people have a chance to vote for something along these lines. But I did want to share some of the things that we have heard from the public. The sale of marijuana has little or no impact on our community. And I would like to remind this council, I believe we have the biggest concentration of marijuana establishments in one location. I have heard from the community that passing this law is believed to relieve some of the consumption on a daily basis that we smell outside constantly downtown Anchorage, all over the city.
Number three, I think something else I've heard from people is tourism has accepted this and finds it whimsical and even kind of a positive thing for what we offer downtown Anchorage. And the fear of the unknown, which has been a big factor with all of our community members downtown, is starting to subside because they're not seeing any kind of impact, substantial impact of the addition of marijuana retail shops downtown. We have also heard that we're very concerned that there's not going to be little smoking shops set up where people can just go and smoke whenever they want to, and not have it to be the actual licensed establishments that are already selling it in the first place. But I think you clearly outline that in your orders that will not be the case. So the Downtown Community Council has no official opinion on legalizing consumption. The DCC Marijuana Alcohol Committee has no immediate plans to advise the council to take a public position for this. The Downtown Community Council is pro-business and welcomes any business opportunities that would increase income for businesses downtown Anchorage. That includes licensees and their establishments. The Downtown Community Council has the densest population, as I mentioned, and we have not seen any of the fears that have been spoke here today. The DCC supports any law that is being brought before the people as a public vote prior to making a decision. And it is, in my personal opinion, that all of the above and more that we do not receive any opposition to pass this on-site consumption law. Thank you.
Thank you. So I probably have time for about another 2 people. Yes.
Hi, my name is Craig Agletti. I own Anchorage here in Anchorage, and I own Fairbanks Cut up in Fairbanks. This is my partner, Lockhart. We've been through the entire process with the state. Some of you may know, we made all the way to end, only to be stopped by the freestanding question. I just wanted to make myself and my partner available if you guys have any questions. I'm sure we can probably answer them or things about this, and also all my colleagues as well. So.
Yeah, sure.
Craig, could I ask you about that? So the freestanding requirements in state law, is that right?
Yeah, it's a statute.
So what? Can you describe a little bit of kind of what happened, what you ran up against, so we understand what freestanding means?
The definition, well, first of all, I don't believe that the board members were able to know the statute. What happened was, I mean, to be frank, what happened was the enforcement side sent out a memo the morning of the meeting to all the board members saying that they didn't support our application because they thought we didn't meet the recommendation or the statute for freestanding. We were already well aware of the statute. It's very simple, it's a very simple statute, a few lines, and it defines what a freestanding building is. The question is, because we have another business entity that occupies that building, it is in our opinion, a freestanding building. That was the question. And the statute doesn't say anything about occupancy, it doesn't say anything about sole occupancy, and that was basically the argument that since there was another occupant in the building, it wasn't freestanding. If you read the statute, we satisfy the statute definition, and so that's why we're under appeal right now in the state.
Thank you. Ms. Salato.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you tell me if the building where there was more than one tenant, if there's separate ventilation for both buildings? Or both tenancies?
That's an important point because the state statute does mention shared ventilation. The building that we're in is a really unique building. It's not so much these days, but it has indoor heat, so it does not share ventilation. There's freestanding AC units in the summertime, but yeah, there is no forced air.
So the dividing walls or whatever structurally are solid and run all the way up to the, I forget what the term was. There was a term for that when it runs floor to ceiling or floor to roof all the way up to the top and it's solid, that it's not like this drop ceilings.
Demising.
They're demising. That's not the word I was thinking, but okay.
Yeah, they're fully partitioned. So the building is basically 3 compartments. It's got our retail's on the ground floor in front, there's an office above us, and there's a garage behind us. And it's all separated. You cannot reach any of the other parts of the retail. And it shares no building.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Constant.
My question is for council. Dean, what's the process the industry would need to go through if they wanted to, at the same time as we, hem and haw, take this question to the voters and run a petition themselves?
You mean they went ahead with their application for
if they wanted to run a petition to get this question on the ballot themselves.
Like outside of this.
It's parallel, exactly at the same time, just to, speed the plow.
Citizens want to propose an initiative. Well, I think we need 10 registered voters in Anchorage first to sponsor the initiative petition, and we submit that to the municipal clerk. The municipal clerk will verify that they are actually used for residents and registered voters. At the same time, the law department will do a legal review to make sure that the question that the citizen initiative proposes is legally sufficient. So it's not prohibited by the Constitution, like it can't make appropriations and things like that. They can't adjust our budget. And that won't be affected, I think. Depends on how they work. The law department has 30 days to do that legal sufficiency. They usually produce a memo, and that would be delivered to the citizen sponsors. Then they have, I think it's 90 days to gather enough signatures to place it on the ballot. And they need a certain percentage of the number of people who voted in the last mayoral election, and that number is 7.
10%, 7,920.
7,920. So if we circulate a petition to gather the signatures, and they have enough, the municipal clerk will then have 10 days to review the signatures, make sure they're all registered voters, permitted to sign the petition, and then certify and place it on the ballot. And then they need to get that done before, what was the last day to submit the petition signatures?
That may be one of the dates that we're proposing to change, but it would be still sometime in January.
So one last follow-up question to that is, in your legal opinion, would this language, if they were to use this language, reach sufficiency just as an opinion, not as a fact?
I would hope so, since he drafted it.
That's top-notch stuff.
Thank you, Dean. Yes, Ms. Dean.
Hi, for the record, I'm Emily Dean, and I'm the Alaska Government Relations Director for the American Cancer Society Cancer Action Network. A couple things, three things I wanted to bring up. One, about process. When the previous ordinances around edibles were going through the process, they did go through extensive review at the Community and Economic Development Committee. However, they did not go before the Health Policy Committee. I had specifically asked at that time if the Community and Economic Development Committee was going to address the health aspects of this issue, and the answer was no, which I think was appropriate. However, there's an opportunity here, and I think it's critical that these health aspects be examined in a space to really look at that separate from land use issues. Second thing, just in that process or in the Community Economic Development Committee process, having some more background on where some of these terms came from. I know I worked on the statewide smoke-free law. I sat through all the committees where there was extensive discussion in the legislature about the definition of freestanding and what that could look like. Many of the things that showed up in the regulations from the Marijuana Control Board were as a result of concerns that were brought forward. That's why freestanding, the separate room, in addition to freestanding, the separate room for observation came out of those discussions. The fact that the ventilation systems say that they are to remove visible smoke, and that there's reference to smell at the property line, and there is not any reference to ventilation removing secondhand smoke exposure of health hazards, is because no ventilation system exists that can remove the ultrafine particles and the carcinogens that are found in the secondhand smoke. The third point I wanted to make is about that ventilation issue. Be happy to talk to you about it more in depth, provide some of the background materials on that. I am concerned that the language that would go on the ballot does mention that a room would be, isolated and ventilated, I think that gives the public the impression that ventilation is going to help with removing the health effects, and that's not actually possible. So that's just one thing to flag as you're going through this process, making sure that you're clear about what can and can't be done as we move forward. I would encourage this to have some discussion at the Health Policy Committee. Thank you.
Thank you. So it sounds like this will go through 2, perhaps 3 additional committees. CEDC, which is meeting when, John? It's meeting on
Tuesday, 9 a.m. to 11 at Public Works off of Elm Orchard School.
Thank you. And then perhaps a Health Policy Committee meeting at some point, and then perhaps a Public Safety Committee meeting at some point. So we'll make sure that all of those dates get sent out to all interested parties. With that, I'll go ahead and close this work session.